I was lucky enough recently to be a guest of the Australian Antarctic Division, which are based just outside of Hobart in Tasmania. And this is the place where it all happens. This is where Australia's Antarctic interests are looked after, where all of the logistics, the bases, our commitments to the treaty, it's all handled here. On the main floor you have a display which shows you a lot of the artefacts that are used in Antarctica, as well as the issues that are facing Antarctica at the moment. There's some videos, there's some static displays. It's quite a good little place to learn a lot about Antarctica. And downstairs they also have a cafe, which is quite good. They even had a sled belonging to the famous Australian Antarctic explorer Sir Douglas Mawson. I was surprised that it was in such good condition because it must be something like 100 years old. They certainly made these things strong in the first place.
I'm sitting here today with Rob Wooding, who is the General Manager of Support and Operations for the Australian Antarctic Division. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you. Pleased to meet you.
Same here. I'm just curious, and I'm sure other people are too, what is the role of the Australian Antarctic Division?
Well, the Australian Antarctic Division has existed now for over 70 years, and it is an organisation within the Australian government which operates our Antarctic bases and manages our scientific activity in Antarctica, and it also is involved in the international work around the Antarctic Treaty System. It's a very unusual Antarctic organisation. Most Antarctic organisations around the world will focus on one aspect of that, so they may focus on the science, or they may focus on operating the Antarctic bases and the logistical support for that, or they may focus on the international relations. So we're very fortunate in Australia to have all those different areas in one organisation, and that enables us to be the real sort of centre of expertise and understanding of Antarctica for Australia. And Antarctica affects everything that happens in Australia is affected by Antarctica in some way, by the weather, by the understandings of science that we're gaining there about climate change, about the oceans around Australia, about the fisheries. And also Antarctica is a neighbouring area, so it's of a strategic importance to Australia as well. We need to know what's going on there and have an understanding of what's happening there. And the Australian Antarctic Division has for 70 years now, more than 70 years, been the centre of expertise. I'm very fortunate. I'm able to been for the last 11 years, I've been running the operations in Antarctica, so managing the bases, taking people there and back by aviation and shipping, managing their food and their clothing and their medical support. It's a fascinating job making these things happen, and it's been my role for a long time, and it's a great job, one of the best jobs you could possibly hope to have. So anyone watching, this is a job you might want to aspire to.
There's a lot of money being poured into the Australian Antarctic Division now by the Australian government. What do you see as the future role of the Australian Antarctic Division? What are the plans coming up for the future for the next 10, 20 years?
Well, we've been very fortunate in the last few years that the Australian government has decided to invest a lot more money in our operations and logistics and into our infrastructure in Antarctica. So they've seen the need to invest in upgrading what we have there. Our Antarctic research stations, our bases, were built in 30 or 40 years ago in their current form. Macquarie Island, where we also operate a base, that's not part of Antarctica, but it's halfway between Australia and Antarctica. That base is now, many of the buildings there date back 50 or 60 years. There's a need to improve our capabilities in Antarctica, our buildings, our ways of getting to and from Antarctica. So the government has decided to invest in that. And that's going to change the way we operate. So we now have the opportunity to invest in energy efficient buildings down there and make use of alternative energies and have them operate much more cost effectively and environmentally sustainable way. We're going to have better aviation. Over the last decade, we have actually established the ability to fly people to and from Antarctica. Other Antarctic nations, such as the US and those in South America, have had that capability for a long time. It's only a recent thing for us. We can now fly to an ice runway at Wilkins, but the government is interested in investing in a year-round hard surface runway. It's considering the business case for that, and that's something that may happen in the next decade or so and would provide us with a much better access by aviation to Antarctica than we even currently have. We're also getting a new ship in 2020-21, the new vessel, the Noinia, the research vessel, the Noinia, will arrive. It's a much bigger ship. It's 60% larger than the existing Aurora Australis. It will be able to do a much wider range of science in Antarctica, and it will also be able to carry much more cargo down south, which will help us in our work in trying to improve our bases. And I mentioned a while ago the Macquarie Island research station, now 60 years old in some parts. The government has also decided to invest in a completely new station there, so we're in the process of rebuilding Macquarie Island, building a new, again, much more energy efficient and sustainable station, and we'll have the ability to clean up and remove some of the old material there in the old station and improve the environment around Macquarie Island. So the future in Antarctica is going to be more efficient, better facilities, better transport, and the ability to do a lot more science and understand much more about how Antarctica affects Australia.
From my understanding of it, there's an awful lot of cooperation in Antarctica between the various nations. I saw that playing out between, say, Scott Base and McMurdo Base, where they actually even share power. So I'm just curious as to how Australia is cooperating with other nations down there in the Antarctic at the moment.
We've been able in the last decade or so to build very close links in operations. So we've always worked closely in science. It's very unusual in Antarctica now for a scientist to be working all by themselves. Scientists work in large teams, and they're often multinational teams. So our scientists will go to other parts of Antarctica and work with scientists from other countries. There are 30 countries operating and doing science in Antarctica at the moment. We work with almost all of those very closely in science. So that's a long-standing arrangement, but more recently we've been able to start to work together operationally much more closely. And the key to that is our aviation. So I mentioned earlier we have the ice runway at Wilkins that we built. That's near Casey Station, if you want to look on a map. And that enables us to fly from Hobart to Casey in 4.5 hours. So it's a really very different way of getting to Antarctica as opposed to up to 2 weeks on a ship ploughing through ice. And that aircraft that we use for that runway, which is a modified A319 Airbus, which has much longer range than planes of that type because it has fuel tanks in the wings, so it can carry a lot more fuel. That plane is a really excellent plane for flying to Antarctic ice runways. We now fly that plane helping other countries as well to 3 other runways apart from our runway at Wilkins. We fly to the US runway at McMurdo and take US and New Zealand expeditioners to their stations that are there on the Ross Sea, which is east of our part of Antarctica. We also fly people to the Italian sea ice runway, which is nearby at Mario Zucchelli Station. Many nations use that route and they fly from Hobart to there on our aircraft. That includes Korea, Germany, New Zealand, the US, France and Italy and China. So that's another operation we run. And we've also been flying from Cape Town to Troll Runway, which is the Norwegian runway, which is below Africa. So we've been working across the area of Antarctica below Australia, all the way from the bottom of Africa around the bottom of the Indian Ocean and all the way through to Ross Sea, which is below New Zealand. And we have been flying into those areas. We also share aviation logistics within Antarctica, so we have ski-equipped propeller planes that we use to fly shorter distance inside Antarctica, and we share those aircraft. We fly people from a range of nations on those aircraft, particularly China and France and Italy, and they also help us with their aircraft. Also, the French help us get people to Macquarie Island. The French Antarctic station, de Montdeville, which is their main Antarctic base, is pretty much directly south of Hobart. It's very convenient for any ship visiting that base to go via Macquarie Island. So the French take our expeditioners to Macquarie Island each year on one of their voyages, and we in exchange for that, we fly some of their expeditioners to Antarctica and within Antarctica. So there's a lot of cooperation based on exchange of services, or barter you might say. So we will help one country with our logistics and they will help us with theirs. We have very close cooperation around these arrangements and very good relationships. In Antarctica, any issues between nations don't really exist within Antarctica. We're all toilers in the same vineyard. We're all working together closely and trying to make things happen down there in a place where it is very difficult to get around and to survive and to support science activities. So the more that nations can help each other, the better things go for everybody down there, and that's how we operate in East Antarctica. If you look at Antarctica, our part of Antarctica where we work is the most challenging part of Antarctica to operate. It is there's far fewer bases there, they're much further apart. It's a long way from Australia to get there. The distance is like when you go to South America, it's actually quite close to Antarctica. It's only a short flight or boat ride. We have a very long distance to travel. We have relatively few bays and harbours that are suitable for ships to go into. It's really important that anyone that wants to operate there cooperate with other nations that are working there, and that's what we do, and it's a really great thing. It's wonderful if you go to one of our bases when there's other people coming through. You might have people from 2 or 3 different nations there for a night or two, telling stories, making food for each other. It's a really great cooperative Antarctic. Antarctica is a great cooperative multinational environment.
Thanks, Rob, for that. It's really good to see that there is so much cooperation going on in Antarctica at the moment, especially when it's such a huge landmass with such distances between stations that people can manage to cooperate. And as we know, the Antarctic Treaty has been operating for many decades, and it's one of those few places on Earth where everyone gets on.
Indeed, it's true. It's a model of how sort of humans get on in general. I think that nations cooperate so well there, and people focus on practical things and trying to make things work. And it's a very great pleasure to work with all the different nations in Antarctica.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you. Very, very privileged to meet the famous Captain Antarctica, and I hope all the best to you in your endeavours.
Thank you very much.